Welcome to the Stewart Squared podcast. We have a lot to talk about because Anthropic has been up to some funny business, and I want to put that into the context of other times that these companies have done things like what Anthropic is currently doing. Feel suckered. I feel like they have basically done shrinkflation on me. I was brought up to a tier of $200 because they started doing micro friction on my $20, and I was like, okay, I'll pay the $200 and get all I can eat. Start building the software. They've done a great product. I don't mean to disparage their great product. They're a private company. They can do what they want. But at the same time, I feel like I've been suckered in a used car salesman deal because now I'm at a $200 subscription, and I've been using it for a month, no issues. Totally, I was below the usage rates, and then this week all of a sudden it's like, nope, you're going to run out earlier. And then I just spent 60 USD in the last 24 hours doing what normally would have completely been fine. And they say they're not changing quality, but I'm just so tired of Silicon Valley lying because the historical record shows there's a lot of lying going on. So, and they are in group inside of Silicon Valley. Were you aware of this already? Have you been paying attention to this?
Uh, you have a tendency to go to conspiracy theories, which I always object to because I don't think people are smart enough to be conspirators and do their jobs at the same time.
But
Um,
what about it is a conspiracy theory?
well, it's like they're lying and they're manipulating you. These are the
Wait,
things you're
but
reflecting.
no, I know I said I was. This was speculation. It was saying that based on the historical record of Silicon Valley, which I want to be really clear on, Meta has done a lot of this.
Meta and OpenAI are
Microsoft
completely trustworthy, but Anthropic tends to be trustworthy, so there is a
Kinda. Up until this point, I would agree with you, but now, and I don't think that I'm alone here. I think there's a lot of people who feel very, very similar to me. Their trust is more than OpenAI. I definitely trust them more than OpenAI, which is why I'm not going to OpenAI. I'm not actually making the jump. Many other people are moving over to OpenAI. Still trust Anthropic more, but I think my skepticism is valid.
So, have you been reading that Perplexity is a scam?
I've not heard this. No.
This is like the last 24 hours, but there's an investigation, and I can't remember who did it, which discovered that Perplexity promised not to memorize your stuff, but
Uh-huh.
does. So
Yeah.
they actually are lying. That this is, I don't know how far this goes, and like mainstream media hasn't picked it up yet, but it's um,
Mm.
so. Uh, Although I think I saw that maybe the New York Times has got a story on it. Anyway, um, what you're talking about is trust, and trust is essential in any domain. I mean, you know, like I just discovered that the place I've been buying my T-shirts for 30 years, Eddie Bauer, is going bankrupt, and they're
Wow.
selling off their inventory. They sold all my size, so I had to go
Wow.
find a new. Eddie Bauer has gone bankrupt. This is the third time, and they're actually going out of business this time.
Whoa.
I'm going to go find a new source for which didn't take me that long. Um, but it's like there's this
Yeah.
uh, awareness that companies need to have that how their customers trust them is really crucial to their success. And Eddie Bauer, having been bankrupt twice before, has kind of lost the faith, and that's really why they're going bankrupt the third time and shutting down because they just mismanaged their business. Um, Same thing, rules in technology actually is more important in technology because nobody really knows what's going to happen. So, are people going to go along the journey with you because you're hot or because you're trustworthy? And that's a balance. So, we just had this little side reference to Meta and OpenAI, who don't seem to understand the role of trust. And it's at multiple levels, right? Are you lying? That's bad. But are you stupid and not strategic? That's
Mm.
actually even worse. And the distinction between OpenAI and Anthropic right now is that Anthropic's still doing the same thing it was doing 5 years ago, whenever the hell they started. And actually, only 3 years, I guess, since they spun out of OpenAI. Um, the uh, they started out with this idea and they're still working on that idea. OpenAI, like, just bought a podcast. It's like, what the heck? You said you were going to like focus and Red Notice and all this stuff, and then you go buy a podcast. It's one of the stupidest things I've ever seen, and it's an indication that OpenAI doesn't actually have a strategy. They're just kind of banging off of opportunities. Meta is the same. Meta has big cash flow, so they don't have the cash problem that OpenAI has. But and indeed, they're being smart by using AI to improve their profitability on Facebook, et cetera. So you can go through all of these companies and you can go, okay, which one knows what it's doing and is doing what it knows it's doing on a regular basis? And the two that really stand out are Google, ironically, because they were accused of being late to the game. But they didn't sit there and just go react to it. They developed a strategy and they're on that strategy, and Gemini is the result of that strategy. And it seems to be well thought out, useful, et cetera. And Anthropic, which is likewise, even though it's a startup company. So it might be that they're sitting there going, we have to go public, so we have to extract more cash.
Yeah, that's it.
That's
Interesting.
in the category of conspiracy or manipulation. It's like, shit, we better start making money on this stuff. And if they have an objective when they go public to be kind of cash flow neutral, that they don't really need the money, that will make their IPO way more interesting to investors than OpenAI, like just piling on more money, 122 billion now. Although my point to you is true, that it's committed, not necessarily funded. They're hopping from one financing to another, and they don't seem to be focused on how to turn it into a real business.
So, yeah, I get all that. I like the idea that their IPO, their margins are Anthropic's margins are at 40%. They recently had to go down from 60 to 70, from 60 or 70% because of recent changes in the usage. A lot of it motivated by the large amount of people who started trusting them because of the Department of Defense kerfuffle, where
Code and their agent business, but yeah.
So, but like I would love to go back into the history, because something else recently happened, which is that LinkedIn, there's something called BrowserGate. So they basically took over people's Chrome extensions and then started to actually search their computers and search their software, all without anyone knowing it. Anybody can look this up. Call for BrowserGate. LinkedIn was definitely doing it. Really, really shady stuff. Who is LinkedIn owned by? Well, it's owned by Microsoft, and Microsoft has a history of doing a lot of different stuff. So let's talk about Microsoft and the history of Microsoft. What was going on with Microsoft did people trust Microsoft in the 80s and 90s?
Never. Literally never. It really started because, as the vendor of BASIC everywhere, programmers who wrote in BASIC trusted Microsoft. That was the last time. And then they got into the operating system business by buying an operating system in response to IBM's request. And there's a little history here, which I'll just go through. Is that IBM went first to a company called Digital Research, which had an operating system called CP/M, control program for microcomputers. And it was kind of the other operating system, the one that people used on workstations and other kinds of stuff, but they never kind of set a standard for the operating system. So every version was a little different. And it was run by a guy named Gary Kildall in Santa Cruz, California. And you know what that means. They were kind of out to lunch. And so the IBM guys showed up and they said, nah, we don't really want to sell you a license. So IBM execs flew to Seattle. And Microsoft's going, yeah, we'll do that. But they didn't have one. So they had to go buy it. And so I can't remember what it's called, something DOS. But, and they renamed it MS-DOS and licensed it to IBM to put on the IBM PC. Well, IBM didn't control that, so they could license it to anybody. And they also built a computer that could be copied by anybody else using standard components. And so IBM lost control of the business, and Microsoft is in control of the business, and that was the trust problem, right? That it was clear Microsoft was doing everything it could to make as much money as possible, and their gross margins were 85 or 90%. So they were making a lot of money licensing it to PC manufacturers, putting BASIC on those computers as well, and and then they went into the applications business, and the whole Microsoft Office thing happened. And so Microsoft has never been trusted. And there was a point in time where Microsoft built its own wallet. This is really interesting historically because Apple did it much later, and people trust Apple, right? And Apple knows that people trust Apple, so they don't ever mess with that. Microsoft did it, and people, I'm not giving Microsoft my financial information and credit cards and bank accounts. I'm not doing that. And so that never worked. They never adopted it because they didn't trust Microsoft. So that's why I say Microsoft has never been trusted really since they did MS-DOS.
And so what is it about the operating system, the licensing? Why did that give people the cringe? Why did that make people cringe?
Because they basically gave it to IBM for free and then charged everybody else. So it was purely mercantile.
Oh.
That was Bill Gates' problem, is he thought in terms of commercialization and merchant transactions. He's transactional, not necessarily strategic. Although he's operating at a strategic level too, because he started with a programming language, did an operating system, did applications, expanded the business. Some say maybe too much because they went into the video game business and other stuff. But so he was strategic at that level, but not in terms of the customer, not in terms of the consumer. This is, if you read the Apple, the first 50 years book, it's really interesting how they kind of figured out that they had to establish trust with the consumer. And Steve Jobs did that intuitively. But Tim Cook turned it into a conscious thing in the company, part of the culture.
Okay, well, this goes directly into what we were talking about, because the whole thing I love about the show is that I understand what a PC is now. I understand what a personal computer is, and I understand why Steve Jobs was so interested in creating a personal computer for the consumer. And then I think, well, what is the extension of that to our day? And it's an LLM. And Anthropic was on the track to establish trust with the consumer to build a personal large language model.
Hold on.
Yeah.
OpenAI did the consumer first. That's why it has 900 million daily active users.
Yeah.
Right? Because they put out a chatbot and people started using it. So they got consumers, individuals, to use it first. Anthropic decided not to do that. I don't even know whether they even considered it, but they focused on the programmer. And then Boris, whatever his name is.
But that's what Steve Jobs did in the 2000s with the MacBook and all these things. Is he focused? Like, there was a huge amount of programmers who.
Consumer is different than the programmer.
I don't know.
The thing that Anthropic did is they enabled programmers, and then they enabled anybody to be a programmer, and that surprised the hell out of OpenAI. They thought it was just the chatbot and so forth, and then you do Sora and all this other stuff. Anthropic was completely focused on how to transform an LLM into a coding agent. First, in the foundation model, but then when Boris Chernsky, what's his last name?
That feels like the 1980s and the 1990s. Is like the people who used those personal computers; those were all geeks. Like, these were all geeks. These were all the people that Anthropic would have been going after.
And normies. Anthropic made it possible for normies to become programmers. That's the thing that changed the whole conversation.
But that's what I'm saying, is that in that they're now losing trust for that audience of people who want a personal large language model, want like what Apple gave the personal computer.
Well, there's a little side trip there, because what is Apple doing about it, right? They've decided to turn Siri into a platform that can use any LLM, even though they're working with Google as their primary partner, and Gemini. So there's speculation right now, and we'll find out in June if they announce something at the Worldwide Developers Conference. But they appear to have come to the conclusion that doing a foundation model themselves is a waste of capital,
Hmm.
a waste of effort.
Hmm.
Instead, they can become the neutral platform for LLMs, and
Hmm.
they'll give access to Gemini to your core personal data inside their ecosystem,
Ooh.
so
Oh,
that
whoa.
the AI can serve your personal interests, which is
Wait.
what I've been beefing about the whole time. Is like, when's Apple going to make this work?
So, but vendor agnostic with no vendor lock-in at the Apple layer.
The vendor is Apple. You're locked into the Apple ecosystem. You're already there, and that because customers trust them, they trust you, Apple, to manage that ecosystem on their behalf. So
But
there's a relationship with Google, which is really interesting because Apple paid who paid
yeah, yeah,
Google paid Apple $1 billion
yeah, yeah, yeah,
to get
yeah. For the
15 or 20 billion from Google search.
yeah.
It's like a little tiny price to pay for Google to have a relationship, and Google will be embedded. Gemini will be embedded in the system level at
Okay.
Macintosh and
So that's
iOS.
the vendor lock-in. Wait. Sorry. So the vendor lock-in to an LLM is Google, but Apple will allow you to change it from app
Yeah,
to Anthropic.
choose your browser, choose your LLM.
Okay, got it.
Um,
That's interesting.
so you can switch if you like it, but there you're working with Google to do the fundamental integration.
Man, so interesting. I just thought, okay, so we've
But
got the
we don't
personal.
actually know that. Remember, we're speculating right now
Yeah.
because Apple's keeping everything under wraps until they decide what to say in June. I'm sure here in early April they probably already know. But
So we have the personal computer and Apple's the trust layer there. Then we have the software that runs on the personal computer, and then we have the LLM, which is not, which feels like it's sort of, well, where does the LLM fit in that hierarchy or in that channel? Where does the LLM fit? Because it's very abstract, it's very philosophical, which is why Anthropic has done such a good job, is because they have a set of humanities people who are like doing deep input into epistemology, ontology, all these different sociology, psychology, all these soft sciences. They have basically got a team of people.
morality, they have a chief morality officer. I don't know, but they have a lady that's sitting there worrying about whether they're being ethical.
Yeah.
Um, so. Uh, so there's the technical stack, and the LLM from Apple's point of view, is now being positioned as an extension to the operating system
Yeah.
platform,
Okay. Interesting.
part of the operating system.
Do you think that's the
Um,
right way? Do you think that's the right way to do it?
I think so. From Apple's point of view, I think it's brilliant because they're not spending this huge amount of capital on all this training the models. Everybody else is doing that, and they're providing an API access to the foundation models that they're not working with. So anybody can integrate with it. But Google has this sort of special access because they're cooperating. Um, and, it's a reflection, in fact, of this whole conversation we're having as Apple is trusted and understands what it means to be
Mm.
trusted. And they've learned over time that Google is a reliable partner. So they can rely on Google to be trustworthy in their ecosystem. And so it's an interesting partner choice rather than with working with Anthropic, which, is still a very young company and has shown some strategic chops, but hasn't really established who they are, right? As
Mm.
a company,
Mm.
Apple's 50 years old and Anthropic's 3. um,
Hmm.
so it would be a big risk from Apple's point of view to work with Anthropic, even if Anthropic is winning right now. But not as much of a risk to work with Google because they've been around for whatever it is.
That's a really interesting point about like who they are. It's like a company is like a person, which kind of wraps into our whole legislative framework right now about companies as persons, as fictitious persons. But the idea of like a company evolving and maturing, and that Anthropic hasn't matured, but the time scales are so quick now that basically they have to mature, right? intense decision making, intense like pressure on them.
So let's just say that OpenAI is in trouble, even though they've just raised 122 billion.
Yeah.
Um, the and Anthropic is not. So Anthropic has shown early signs of understanding the value of strategy, focus, reliability at some level, and OpenAI has not. And they are now vulnerable because people are beginning to not believe what Anthropic says. That's why I think that buying a podcast thing is incredibly stupid. They put the whole company at risk to satisfy some ego thing. And so you're having issues with Anthropic because they are in the middle of trying to improve their business model and trying to understand how they can use what they've done so far to do that and to expand people's opinion of them. I actually, here's the parallel, I'd say. Anthropic is the Microsoft, and Google is the Apple.
IBM. Oh, interesting.
No, Anthropic is serving programmers, right? But they started with that, creating a set of technologies that makes actual programmers, people who have been trained to write programs, to make them much more productive. But one of the side benefits of this is they also made it possible for normies to program. And so it's not a strict parallel because Microsoft was doing operating systems for early personal computers and Apple was actually making them. And, Apple didn't get into the situation it was in until they bought Next. And they transitioned the Mac OS from a proprietary operating system to one that had Linux underneath it. Unix. And then when they built the iPhone, they used the Next OS. They used Linux. So Unix is now the common operating system between the Mac and the iPhone. And this is amazing. No one's ever pulled this off before, to have the same fundamental operating system, both mobile and desktop.
What does that make for Android? What does that make Android?
Android is not based on. I actually don't know what the underlying. We should ask that question.
Yeah, I'm going to ask right now.
What is the underlying operating system OS for Android?
Okay.
Because it was built before.
No, built on the Linux kernel.
It is on the Linux kernel. Okay,
modified version of the Linux kernel that Google has customized for mobile and embedded devices. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Binder.
The speakers and all that kind of stuff.
So both. That's a really interesting point. I did not realize that the OS is the same on my phone and on my computer.
When you say same, you have to be careful with that because it's the kernel is the same, but TV OS, iPad OS, Mac OS is still very different. There's a desktop computer; it has a lot of other stuff around it, but and the iOS, these are all different versions, but the same kernel.
Okay. This gets me into something I've been studying since our last show about ISA, instruction set, and RISC-V, and the existential threat to ARM.
I think ISA means integrated system architecture. But.
Yes, yeah. And so it actually comes out of Berkeley. And we've talked about this last show because we had some really interesting questions because we started talking about RISC, and then I kept on hearing about RISC-V. What is it? So I've been studying it. Came out of University of Berkeley. This was, I think, in the first Trump admin. And so they were like, oh, we don't want to be under the hood of the United States anymore. So they move it to Switzerland. And so it's Switzerland. It was now in a nonprofit in Switzerland, which means the Chinese are using it in order to get the ISA, because that's the first part of the stack of things that China needs to build on its own. It's the easiest one, and they've now done it. So RISC-V is open source. China has got it outside of the American sort of thing, but they don't have the next thing, which is CDA, which is the software that people use to design the chips, which I imagine ARM is using a lot of and stuff like that. And then below that, they have the ASML is the next choke point, Or no, sorry, there's another one. There's the fabs, as we've been talking about in Taiwan. Then below that is the ASML choke point, which is a giant choke point that China will never get out of. And then I think there's another one below that. But this RISC-V thing is really interesting because they're in Switzerland. So like there's an open source instruction set. Do you know what the instruction set does? Have we gotten to that? What's going on there?
It might take a while to
Yeah.
find this, but the instruction set, the reduced instruction set computing, RISC, means when they say reduced, they kept it simple and didn't try to do everything in the chip.
No.
So the core CPU is based on a reduced instruction set. And then you have a bunch of other chips that are integrated into that. That's the integrated system architecture. So you have essentially multiple processors acting in concert as the CPU for the computer.
Cool.
But the core of it is a simple reduced instruction set. And Microsoft is kind of hosed because they are not using an integrated system architecture around a RISC processor. Still using Windows, basically. And Windows has gotten much more sophisticated, but all this stuff, anyway, that's
yeah, okay, got it.
about this. There's a lot of issues in Windows. Did you notice the little anecdote about the pilot of the Artemis 2 says, I have two Outlooks open and neither of them work? It's turned into a meme. Like, of course, Outlook never works. So all of Microsoft's applications are based on Windows, which is not based on a RISC architecture. It's
oh man. So, and the whole government relies on Microsoft.
yeah.
And
This I've been getting into this, trying to figure it out. So there's a. I can't remember. I looked it up, but I can't remember what it is now. But the government has a level of qualification for cybersecurity risk, and Microsoft is at the high level. Google is also at the high level, and there are a few others. But Microsoft has a particular exception, and it turns out that the government agency that decides about cybersecurity decided to ignore all the issues in Windows to make it the preferred vendor because Microsoft sucks up, and that's good. Google has never gotten that exception, so they actually are better than Microsoft in cybersecurity, but the government has decided to stick with Microsoft, independent of any logic. This is very much what's happening with Anthropic and the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
The government doesn't operate on a basis that's hard. That's easy.
It's weird. It's weird Byzantine stuff. Like it's stuff that would have happened in the Byzantine Empire.
And it's like, well, I mean, what Trump's doing now has made it all insane.
Is it FedRAMP authorization levels? FedRAMP, Microsoft, GCCI.
But Microsoft and Google are theoretically at the same level.
Okay.
But Microsoft has a special thing where the CISA, anyway, the group inside the federal government that decides what is secure or not.
CISA, CISA directives.
They decided to ignore the warnings about Microsoft, and that it's kind of a scandal that nobody understands, so it doesn't really turn into a scandal.
Man,
but I have this problem with Gilman because Gilman is cleared for top secret authorization, and he insists on using Microsoft software, and I'm like going, I hate this stuff. I've had to suffer through Microsoft software for 30 or 40 years, and I don't want to do that anymore. So, but all Saploy is locked down on Microsoft software, and we all complain about it constantly, including Gilman.
And so let's go back to that thread because that's a really interesting one. I still don't understand the trust, why nobody trusts Microsoft, but beyond that initial move, did they do more things in the 90s and in the 2000s that made people not trust them?
So there was Gates, and there was Ballmer, there was Nadella. And under Gates, programmer was king. under Ballmer, it was not clear who was king, and that was one of the issues. Like he bought Nokia for some reason, and people still don't really understand what his logic was. Um,
Hmm.
and he's a salesman and not strategic, and so there was this interregnum where Microsoft kind of went sideways. Then Nadella came back, and what Nadella did was he made the IT guy king. So Microsoft's core customer is the enterprise and big companies running their systems, and like the government, but also huge companies. And so Nadella got them into a place where they were trusted and they had account control, which is like the thing that everybody always seeks with big companies. They were the safe choice. And it used to be IBM. Nobody ever got
Yeah.
fired for choosing IBM, and that actually changed. And then Microsoft took over. So it's not the programmer anymore; it's actually the IT guy. That's two different kinds of people. Although interestingly, that's where Anthropic is crossing over. Um, so along that way, Microsoft never established any visceral connection with the end user of the
Hmm.
computer.
Yeah. Okay.
So people who use Windows as a personal computer don't trust Microsoft because they know they're not the target customer. IT people did, and they know how to
Mm.
manage all the cyber security issues and usage issues. So one of the things that happens, why people hate Outlook and Microsoft software as users, is that Microsoft allowed the IT guy to control how systems work, and you have to go ask your admin for permission.
Oh God.
So as a user, you're stuck having to deal with goddamn IT people. And if
Oh.
there's a thread in Steve Jobs, we never deal with IT people. Those guys are basically. He made a
So let's talk about that, because that's IT people. I feel like, and I've been talking to my friend, one of my mentors, who works in a very, very antiquated company in the eastern seaboard that does a lot of things in old businesses that are very slow and have the IT departments, and it's like one of those businesses, right? That we've been kind of like that probably uses Microsoft or does all, one of those companies. And he's just saying like his productivity and his ability, he's one of the top 0.1% Claude people who's just making magic happen because he's always been a builder who learned how to program in order to build. And so he just does all these full applications. He knows how to do the whole thing. So he basically is saying from everything he sees, the IT guys are going to, like, the company will die if IT guys continue to retain control, because their whole job is to say no.
yeah,
And
slow down.
now the whole thing is going to just hollow out.
Yeah, IT is under threat, uh, and since IT is slow, the IT people are actually a little slow to understand this. Right? That's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Interesting.
and uh, so this is a really interesting time, and I have in the IT world, I have a reputation, and from having been the editor of Infold ever so long ago. And when I did the mainframe is dead column, um, the IT people really were ripped, pissed, because there's a fundamental threat to the role that they play in
Yeah.
an enterprise,
Yeah.
and which I understood, and I kind of go along with the joke, but and IBM went along with the joke and published a picture of me in their annual report eating my words, and which was kind of fun to do. But you look at the structure of enterprise systems now, and this is where it gets to be Anthropic is the kind of death knell of IT. You still have to have in a big company a department that worries about your computing resources. But the gating item has always been developing new applications and responding to needs inside the company, which has taken forever because IT people didn't really understand the business and the business people didn't understand IT. So it'd be this long process of communicating with each other.
Hmm.
So your buddy is totally correct, because now the marketing department can do their own applications for analytics or whatever the hell they need, so the core systems, the big computing, are actually is now the majority is now in the cloud. When the cloud started 15 years ago, the majority
Hmm.
was premise.
Whoa.
And companies are increasingly trusting the cloud so they don't have to run their own systems inside the buildings, or, theoretically. And so there's a long-term change that's already started with the cloud, where first of all, you trust AWS, and secondly, you trust Azure. Azure is second to AWS, but only because Amazon got started before Azure. Um, so, that decision is now part of kind of the programming complex that Anthropic has created, where you can make an application go and decide which cloud your data should be stored in automatically. You don't have to worry about it anymore.
I
It's not
just did it.
true. That's an
I just
statement, but
I just did it. So I just got all of our entire both Stewart Squared and Crazy Wisdom. I got on R2, and this is the funniest part. I did not mean to do it. My first server is called D1. The second server that I set up is called D2. And guess what Cloudflare's storage bucket is called? Do you know what it's called?
no, I have no idea.
R2.
R2.
So I just installed R2 on D2, R2D2. I've got my server called R2D2, and I did that happen randomly. I did not plan that, which I find is hilarious.
The order is completely irrelevant, but I have an order in for a Rivian R2.
Oh yeah, there's an R2 for Rivian as well.
They just introduced a new model called the R2. The first one's called R1, so that makes sense. But
so the Cloudflare R2 is a storage bucket. I'm paying 20 cents a month to store all of our video episodes, both yours and mine. So 20 cents a month for like 100 gigabytes of storage on my R2 bucket. And it's actually, I think Cloudflare is the only one with a Buenos Aires. But why did I start talking about this? Because of we were talking about
how you delegate the management of systems. To
okay,
AI.
yeah, the cloud. Oh, so it was so easy. It was so easy. Like it's just like it's now connecting APIs with a chat layer that's just going and doing it all as long as I have tokens, which Anthropic is now starting. Yeah.
One of the things about companies that have been around for a long time that are big is that a lot of their base systems, general ledger and database, were done in the era of COBOL. Common business-oriented language is what COBOL stands for, but which was started in the 50s and was predominant through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the 80s. I've seen people talk about how they basically assigned Claude to take all the COBOL and translate it into a modern language and replace the entire system.
Oh,
this was the lock that mainframes had, but they don't have it anymore. Right. And now it's in the cloud. So it's like the fundamental systems to manage a large corporation are undergoing incredibly rapid change, where the very nature of being an IT person, you don't have an advantage. It's actually a disadvantage. So, because how do you persuade the CEO of a bank? All the systems and integrate them and make them much, much more effective.
And all the leadership of these companies really don't know the capability of AI.
Not at an intuitive level. No, this is like we're all sitting there going like, "What? What are you talking about?" They could use a chatbot themselves and put contracts in or ask them questions and do travel planning and shit like that, but they have no idea what that means in terms of how their companies are managed.
Oh, interesting. That's a good question. How is it
over the next 5 years, right? Companies that really do know how to use technology as an advantage, a business advantage, will end up being more successful ultimately. And does Microsoft understand how to do this? It's a really interesting question because they're stuck in this enterprise thing. Or Apple, even Apple. Is Apple changing the way its internal systems are operating? They've always been kind of best of class in terms of like they know to the minute where every item in their supply chain is. This is Tim Cook's whole thing, right? So they know when the little transistors are showing up at the right factory and then getting into a computer and shipping out to retail. They've got incredible systems, but this is going to change the cost and efficacy of running their system. So even we have to question whether Apple is really on top of what it's doing with internal systems.
So
And
do
who
you?
knows how to do that, right? It's still something that people really don't know how to do, particularly when it comes to physical stuff that you're shipping around and keeping track of.
Do you buy the idea that companies are going to get a lot smaller? There was a recent viral moment where this guy has only one employee and he's selling the GP1 drugs, and
It was in the New York Times. I read
yeah,
it. Yeah, this dude was a middleman, right? He wasn't making the drugs and he wasn't
yeah,
selling them. He was just moving them between the front and the back. And he's going to do 1.8 billion in revenue. And he actually showed the New York Times his financials so that they could report that, because otherwise nobody would believe that one dude and his brother can generate 8 billion.
But I've got this beautiful question I want to ask that's related to that, which is you've seen a lot of companies go through a large, like from very small, Justin TV is the one that comes to mind, to Twitch, but you've seen a lot of them, and they sort of grow really fast. I imagine, like in the 2010s, in the 2020s, it became a desire for a lot of founders to not actually grow really big. But every time they do it, every time they always start growing, and then they want to keep on growing more.
Yeah. So you're referring to the growth imperative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Venture capital requires growth in order to take $1 down, turn it into 100 in the future.
Right.
You have to grow. So to the degree that everybody thinks that venture capital is the starting point for any company, which is interesting, this $1.8 billion GLP-1 drug company never raised any capital, and actually never hired anybody either, except for his brother. Is growth the only objective? So, there's kind of Main Street business. You have retail store, doctors, people like that serve a local community. They don't grow necessarily. They might get bigger, but they don't do it to create an outcome and make a lot of money. They're doing their thing. That's Main Street business. And then there's corporate world, where through acquisition, or as they call it, organic growth, you end up with a big company. And if you're in the latter, growth does matter, because even if you become public, you have investors who want you to grow, so their stock will be more. There's this growth imperative, like you have to grow. The economy has to grow, right? That's how presidents are measured, as the economy growing, et cetera, creating more jobs, blah, blah. So I don't know. I'm,
so these large businesses that have the IT gatekeepers who are just slowing down business will not be able to adapt to the AI. So there's like sort of like an existential threat. Then we've got large businesses who do know how to use technology, like Google, Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA, all these guys. They can probably use AI. They're probably actually pretty good people to learn from how they're using AI in large organizations, but they're so big. Then you've got small groups of people who are now starting businesses. In those small groups of people, like, is it gonna grow? Is it the same growth imperative for those small groups of people who are technologically enabled with this really insane technology that basically removes technical debt, may create another type of technical debt, may create other types of debt, but like the things I can do now are crazy. Like, it's totally insane.
It ends up being, what's the founder want? You start a business. You're a founder. 100%. You want to raise capital and grow fast, and you have to. And that's this guy that did the 1.8 billion is like, he kind of fell into it. He was sort of a numbnut, basically. But he fell into this opportunity and learned enough about how to write programs using whatever it is, that he could do all this stuff himself. That's exception, not the rule. So the question you're asking is, when does it become the rule that anybody can start a business and not have to raise capital and not have to hire people? That's a really hard thing to call, because we're so early in this, right? The thing that Anthropic went from like 8 billion of ARR to 14 billion in 3 months is like, that's just phenomenal. But it's happening so fast that people are just struggling to catch up. and we can't really put ourselves out in front of that. So I don't think that that's going to become the norm. I think you'll still have big companies, but it'll transform how big companies are
Organized.
organized for computing, at least.
Oh,
And because a lot of those big companies make stuff, like, automobile companies still have to make
yeah,
stuff. Like,
yeah.
here's a strategic issue for Tesla. Tesla does not have model years; they just have models, right? So they did the Model
Oh,
Y,
interesting.
Model 3, the Model S. I'm trying to, they're just dropping two of the low volume ones. So they only have two models left, or maybe three
Wow.
with the Cybercab. So car companies for decades have been having model years. They do some changes and they call it the 2026 model. Um, and Elon Musk doesn't believe he has to do things the way other people do them. And I think this is a core issue with why Tesla's been in trouble. It's not just about electric cars anymore because you can buy those from other people. How are they doing their business and keeping people engaged in their brand, if you will? Instead, he goes off and does Doge and pisses everybody off, and doesn't seem to be paying attention. And they haven't introduced a new model except for the Cybercab and the Cybertruck, neither of which I'd ever touch with a 10-foot pole. But
Mm.
as I said, I'm going to buy a Rivian. Um, so
So wait. How does the model? How does the model number? Why is that a strategic risk?
because you spend a lot of money building these factories, right? So how do you keep people engaged? How do you get them to buy the next version? How do you get them
Interesting.
to continually come back and buy more? If your Model Y does, or whatever it is, I guess
Yeah, got it.
Model 3, if the
Interesting.
Model 3 changes itself, but they don't call it a new model year, when do you buy another one?
So we got about 5 or 10 more minutes left. There's a key part there that's related to what's going on with the oil prices. How do the automobile companies, which have already been sort of like really gnarly change since 2020 and the bailouts and everything like that, how is this going to start to move? How is our automotive industry going to maintain itself against
Well,
Chinese existential threat?
I mean, yeah, this is written about a lot. The Chinese, the percentage penetration of electric vehicles in China itself is significantly different than anywhere else, much higher.
Mm,
I can't remember what
mm.
the number is, but everybody buys EVs because all the infrastructure is there. Um, and uh, and there is this thing happening right now when gas is $4 a gallon here in the U.S. The incentive to buy electric vehicles is much greater without the government.
Mm.
So actually, Rivian is selling more than, and actually
Oh,
Tesla, their last quarter they sold more than anybody expected. Um, and so EVs are looking attractive on a equal basis, and it might be kind of a false positive because Valerie's Rivian, she has to plug it in, and it costs some electricity, and you can't
yeah.
quite tell how much that is. But anyway, it's like uh, you're not subject to the same swings of gas. So if you use China as the model, there is a view that even if Trump doesn't like them, the people still buy EVs anyway, and
Mm.
um, and so that transition, which will be painful. The irony is, when you're making cars the traditional way, you have to build a factory, you have to build the cars. It takes forever to decide, you're going to make a change, and all the car companies got off on EVs. General Motors, Ford, everyone, and Volkswagen, all of them were like really into EVs, and they're going to spend billions of dollars building plants to make EVs and buy batteries and all that kind of stuff. And then shit happened like last year, and they all said, "Oh shit, we have to write all this off, and we're not going to do it
Whoa.
anymore." Meanwhile, BYD is selling them all around the world except the U.S. Um, and
Oh man.
they're selling a lot of cars. So they're always a little out of sync in the traditional business. And what has China done to make car manufacturing so much more agile than it is in the U.S. or Europe? And that's an existential question. Very interesting thing that's going on is Ford realized what it did wrong, which is it tried to build electric cars on its gas car platform, right? The frame of the car
Hmm.
and the way that it works. So they canceled their EVs. I mean, think they're making the F-150 still and a Mustang, but they're building a new plant from the ground up only to build EVs. So they're basically
Wow.
trying to duplicate what the Chinese did because
Whoa.
and if you build and actually Tesla kind of did this, but if you intentionally build an EV and you're not confused about gas, you build a different kind of car. Rivian's doing this as well. And so
Huh.
the model where EV car manufacturing is different than gas car manufacturing, and you have to really buy all the way into it to do it, which China clearly has done. Tesla kind of did by mistake, if you will, and Rivian is doing it intentionally, and there's others too. So what's interesting is, how well do the legacy companies understand the opportunity? And China didn't really have a legacy business. In fact, General Motors and Ford sold a lot of cars in China, a lot of gas. Anyway,
So where is that going to head in terms of? So basically, what I got from what you just said is that the traditional way of manufacturing cars is going to change pretty drastically. We're probably outside of the mainstream. Everyone gets their own cars over the next 10 to 20 years.
yeah,
Self-driving cars are going to be self-drive. Everybody's going to just share self-driving cars, and then those people who can afford sort of electric cars ownership, all those different things, will be a much smaller class of people who can do that.
like I live
And then,
in the middle of nowhere.
yeah,
Doing autonomous vehicles in the middle of nowhere is really hard. Like
yep,
the Rivian and Tesla uses the lines in the road to kind of guide the car,
yeah, yeah.
cameras and everything. Well, we're on a little road, Bishop's Lodge Road, and then we get on a dirt road to come up to our house, and there's no lines on it. It's like an AV going to be able to figure out how to drive up to our garage. And there's probably ways to solve that problem, but having 100% penetration where the whole system has been changed and there's no more gas cars anymore and everything is autonomous, that's way beyond my lifetime. I don't even think about it because it's like, it may be beyond your lifetime. Maybe Adam will see,
Yeah.
but that's in the range of multiple decades of change. So it's good fantasy, and there's a bit of a resurgence of interest in Jetsons. I don't know. Did you ever watch the Jetsons? I think it might.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And they had like automated dinners and a robot maid, and flying cars. And, it's people are fascinated to see how close we've gotten to what the Jetsons imagined back in the '60s. So
This is the hardest part about sci-fi it's the hardest part about hype is that it's really difficult to tell what is sci-fi. Definitely my life right now is very sci-fi in the sense of what I can build with the AI. That's sci-fi now. And I'm living in sci-fi in that little area.
not anymore. As soon as you could do it, it's not science fiction.
Yeah, but it's like the future shock of like, okay, it's here now.
Yeah.
We're in the transition point, the liminal Bardo space between normal and sci-fi, but and it's now there. But then what are the other hammers to drop is a really interesting type of thing. We could talk about future shock, but I think I think we can round up today.
Our brains are shocked. We're not able to.
Yeah. Future. We'll talk about future shock when our brains are not shocked by whatever is going on. All right. See you guys next week.